Okay. Your screen is shared and now you can.
They can see
Open.
that.
Yes.
Oh, I open it or? No.
So
it's
now
already
you
open.
can just open all your documents
Oh.
that you're gonna go through.
Perfect.
Yeah, things on, it's recording all the things, and then you'll just kind of watch for the. So if you like hover above the green,
Mm-hmm.
then you just check the chat every once in a while,
Okay.
maybe when you're asking if there's questions. And yeah, I don't know if it worked fine for me. No.
Oh, we had such a great turnout last week. Okay, so how do I get rid of these?
So you can just do the little like minus.
Okay. All right.
Your mouse should be hooked up to.
Oh, thank you. That
Yep.
makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to start out with 22K, just a reminder that this is a state law. And the utilities, notification of the utilities does a couple of things that let your buyers know how to get a hold of the utility company, but also escrow, if they're prorating things, then they can take care of all of that. And that's a big deal. You don't want your buyers to be stuck with old bills and sorry, that has to be paid, or there's no electricity or internet or whatever it is. So I just want to, the manual that is for the 22K. Once again, I just want to encourage you, when you have a question about a form, go there first. We're always there as a resource, but we're not always available. So right here, RCW means that's a state statute, a state law, and that a written request to the closing agent to disperse the closing funds and make sure that's all taken care of. The purchase and sale agreement must include the names and addresses of all utility providers having lien rights against the property. And that's what you want to avoid. Let me see if I can't move that up here.
I know that thing's been white.
Yeah, okay, so we'll just leave it up there. And then one other thing, if neither box is checked where you request it or you waive it, then the closing cost and prorations paragraph form 21 provides that the parties request the escrow, the closing agent's services, and form 22 should be used. So it's, even if on the front of your purchase and sale, even if it's either one isn't checked, that they'll do that. The seller is required to provide this information, and the form says within 5 days of mutual. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And then the form provides that if the names and addresses of the utility provider are not filled in at the time of mutual acceptance, the seller has 5 days. So that's an important one to make sure. And I can tell you that in compliance, one utility, just the name of it will be returned, and the note will say something like, please provide the address, city, state, and zip.
I did that for big cities, but here there's like 4. Like there's a limited amount, but having all the information, I provide it every time.
Yes, you do.
Even if they don't, I put it in there, but I fill it out based on the address.
Right,
And
because you know.
yeah,
See, if I was writing a deal in Wenatchee, I wouldn't know for sure.
yeah,
Chelan County PUD is a pretty good guess,
yeah.
but I don't know. And the best time to fill this out is at listing, when you list the property. So the listing brokers really should have that already done. Okay, so nope, there's nothing else. So I am all done with that soapbox. Because I have gotten notes that were not pleasant. And I'm sorry. Speak with the boss, the big boss. Okay. Huh?
About
Returning it.
returning forms.
Okay.
Oh, gotcha.
So this is a handout that I'll include after today's session. And this is a handout that is on Northwest MLS. And if you go to legal bulletins and you click on that, the very first thing it will say is revised forms 2023. You can get red line, you can get blue lines, you can get anyway. And I have to say, thank you everyone for checking and making sure you have the new revised forms. That was awesome. I do want to start with saying one thing. And that is on notice of low appraisal and the work orders. Last week, somewhere I got information that I wrote down that when you include the work orders, you include the appraisal. You do not. You just include the work orders with your request, and that form is 22A work order, but it might have an N in there. So let me just
I
look.
thought it was NW or something. I thought I had a W. AW.
Let me,
Oh,
okay, so it's here. Let me just find it. It has a WO at the end. I just haven't learned it. Well, that's not right.
we haven't gone that far, so it's the other direction.
Okay. But I wanted to clarify it. It is just the work order. Okay. So I had 28 written down. And that's halfway through the seller finance. So
I thought it was 23 we left off on, just
23.
page 23.
Oh, that very well could
My
be.
memory isn't.
See, that's
Yeah.
the end of, that's the end where we talk about. Okay, thank you for being my memory. I appreciate that. Okay. So in keeping with the updated forms, then what they've done on this one, which is the notice of low appraisal. So if your buyer has an appraiser come and it's appraised below the agreed upon amount, then what well, right here. So they've including paragraph 5, appraisal less than sell price. That's all they did to that particular form. Let me just double check that because it doesn't seem like a lot. Okay. Low appraisal now on the other documents we had where especially a purchase and sale agreement where it speaks to if you have a financing contingency, that the possibility of work orders from the lender. And that's something to a buyer that you want, or to a seller that you want to make sure that they understand. That's a possibility. So the 22B, what they've done is now, remember it used to be 45 to 60 days. Now they have that as a negotiation. And so that's right in here, like the 5 days to have it listed, you can negotiate that. If you have a beautiful home and your buyer is like 10 days out because you're going to have a professional photographer or a professional stager, or they haven't moved all their stuff to their storage, whatever, then a compelling story, usually the seller can work with that. And then, and this says the buyer's property, it must be listed within whatever days you have filled out after mutual acceptance of the document. So when you get a purchase and sale agreement on the very first page, let's say Form 21, your closing date either needs to be blank or it needs to say see Form 22B, because this form now dictates and is in charge of that kind of stuff. Okay, so over here, if the buyer fails to do so, this contingency and all other conditions in this agreement, financing, inspection, and other contingencies shall be deemed waived.
Which is nutty, but I like that they clarified it.
But they made that crystal clear. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like a lot of these arrangements.
Well,
So,
before, just having the property when you're reading that.
Yeah.
one, it's confusing. It's nice that they have buyer's property.
yes,
Okay, oh, so it says 5 days above your hand right there.
yeah,
Can you go over 5 days?
yes,
Okay, that's just the.
If you leave it blank,
It's 5. Okay,
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Before, yeah, they didn't even have a spot to fill in.
It was 5 days and you had to do like a 34 where you change it to however many days you think.
Mhm.
So this is good. Okay. So let me say that one more time. If the buyer fails to do so, the contingency, everything is waived.
Hmm.
And shall be deemed waived, and the closing date shall be 30 days from the buyer's waiver. So that's really critical that you and your buyer and the seller all understand and you're all on the same page. Because what happens when all your contingencies are waived?
Buy the house or you're screwed.
You go to closing or, yep, exactly. I like the way she phrased it then.
Real simple. I misunderstood what waiving a contingency really meant in the beginning. Oh, I almost got screwed over real bad.
Yeah.
Very not good.
So B, they separated this out. So B, buyer property sold. And you know that means it's a contract. It doesn't mean it's closed. It just means when you have a mutually signed contract, that property is sold, even though you haven't reached closing. If buyer has not sold the property or given notice, this contingency by the end of the contingency period, then this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. And a lot of times if you have a contingent sale and it fails to close
Oh.
and you want to, the buyer maybe only used up, they still might have like 15, 20 days in that contingency, then that's when you as a buyer broker speak to the seller broker and say, it's back active and we would like to have the full time for that contingent. See if we can't get another contract during that time. Okay. For the purpose of this addendum, the term sell, selling, or sold shall mean the buyer has entered into a valid and enforceable agreement with the purchase and sale. This is added. Buyer's notice of sale or waiver shall be on the contingency property notice form 90K or similar form. So that's what they've added there. They've just pulled it apart and clarified it. I think finally they did a really good job. Okay, the second part of this, the seller's consent shall be on seller's consent on the contingent sale form 90L or a similar form. So these are the forms that you use when you're getting if it is a contingent on the sale or closing of that second buyer's property and or has a closing date less than 30 or more than 45. They changed that from 60 from the date of mutual acceptance on the offer. Tom has done a lot of these deals, and I think his second one he had 3 extensions on this 60 days, and they finally sold and it went through, and it was on the west end side. It was a very unique property. The whole living room had those glass doors like a garage door that went out and it looked out over the ocean. Oh, it was gorgeous. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. And it was like $850,000.
Oh my God.
But it's fabulous, but, is small. Okay, seller's termination shall be on the contingency period, contingency property notice 90K or a similar form. So this just is now just saying right in here what forms to use. The seller may keep the property on the market in the contingent until the seller has received notice that the buyer has satisfied or waived this contingency. So, do you understand what that means?
No.
Okay, so you have your home for sale and another broker brings you an offer and it's contingent on them selling this. Okay. So as long as they have not sold that, remember, the mutual document, right? Then this is under contingent. But when they've sold it,
So
Then-
you're still actively on the market under contingent.
that's right. And that's why when you search for property, it's really good to do active contingent. So that those come up. And if there's something your buyers might be interested in, just call that broker and say, how strong is this going?
Yeah.
Mostly I get, I need to change that. That other blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't hurt to call.
And then when you get the L, then you change it to sold,
Mhm.
90L,
Yeah, well, then you change it to pending.
pending,
Yes,
yeah, that's what I meant.
yes. I know you meant. So, on a contingent sale, if you have a backup offer, remember you use form 39, not 38A. The seller shall include the second buyer's addendum. Otherwise, if you use 38A on a contingent sale, you have sold your property twice. And that can be a real issue.
Little bit.
Yeah, so that's really important to make sure that you use 39 as a backup. And the listing broker especially needs to know that, which is surprising how many do not. Okay, so this one is where they fail to close. And this is where they added the words, the property has failed to close, which kind of is, but it is failed. And this agreement and shall be on the contingency property notice form 90K or similar. I guess you could use a 90 blank. I don't know. I would use the K. Any questions on that? Contingent sales. Okay, so we're at the financing addendum. And in here, what they've done is they've really opened up, where it says there's a waiver form. And for seller financing, I think the basic rule is if they haven't sold anything within 12 months, then there should, getting a waiver on that is really easy to do. So this just kind of fills you in, identify an exemption from the licensing requirement. So this is a state statute. This is something you really need to watch for. If seller does not give notice to buyer that seller either has obtained the waiver or identified an exemption from under this form. So there's a place where there's a whole bunch of exemptions that you can have within 5 days of mutual acceptance. Buyer may terminate the agreement at any time. So this is something on the selling side that we really need to keep watch of and make sure that if you're doing a Seth, if you're doing an owner finance, you and Sarah just really keep on top of this and make sure that your seller qualifies. Yes.
I think, I don't
remember how many you get to do per year?
I think it's one every 12 months, but there may be exceptions to that.
What is,
It's
I've not done any of that. What is the way?
You know, if you buy and flip and then you finance, seller finance, after so many, the state is going to say, hey, you're a lender
Okay.
and you're acting as a bank. So it goes over to different rules and regulations, which are really strict. Yeah.
You get to do a certain amount of every, I think it might be like 3 or 4 or 5.
Really?
I think it's fine.
Is it?
Yeah, but to be able to get to the FI rate, you just have to.
You just go online. Yeah.
And they usually do that.
Oh, okay.
But it's just meant to prevent people from acting.
So before they put this in here, or before they pass that law,
Yeah, it's fine.
yeah, is it 5?
Yeah, during one calendar year. But
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. We had developers that would have anywhere from 15 to 40 lots. And they would offer owner financing. And before there was never any issue, but when they passed that law, then they had to start getting getting the waiver or it's a different altogether. It's really different. And then what they found out is if they just have different LLCs, then they can make that work. So I don't know. There's a way around a lot of things. So if the waiver or the notification acceptance isn't identified, then of course, then the money is refunded to the buyer. Disclosure, if the property will be used for residential dwelling, seller shall provide buyer with a residential disclosure summary prescribed by DFI or a compliant federal disclosure under Regulation Z, which includes the material terms, interest, what the amortization is going to be, if there's a balloon payment of the loan and the cost of financing. And usually on seller financing, there's no fees, there's no appraisal. So that really is, a lot of times you'll see this from relative to relative. It gives them 5 years to build up their credit and then to build equity, and then they can go in and refinance it and pay off grandma and grandpa or mom and dad or whoever. They're just changing the letters there. I really want to get through all of the documents. If you don't know how to do seller financing, then I'm happy to, especially when Tom is feeling better, to have him come in and go through it legally, what really works well and what you should fill out. I just do want to say, if you do D, promissory note and deed of trust, you do not do anything in E. A lot of times people will check due on sale. It's either or. It's either section D or section E. And if you're doing one fresh, first time, call us. We're happy to go through the process and help you to understand. It used to be that a note and deed of trust was a non-judicial foreclosure, which means that if I sell you property and you and I agree that you can't afford it anymore and you're going to give me back that property or possession of it, you're going to leave, then there's a couple of forms that are filled out, you record them, and it's done. But now they are requesting that there be a judicial thing, even with a note and deed of trust. So,
Check if there's any chat.
oh, thank you. All right.
Got 5 people on your Zoom.
Hello, everybody.
So yeah, if you guys, well, I guess tell them if we can't hear them, so just put stuff in the chat.
Yeah, and for those of you that came in late, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So put it in the chat if you have a question. Okay, so the thing that they changed on evidence of fund is they included the down payment program. If it's Washington State, or if there's, what was that one that Michael was saying today?
Zero now.
Yeah.
The silent,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, so whatever type it is, we need to really disclose that to them. J has been improved. And this is where, when you usually lead paint, if it's painted over, then there isn't any damage. And most homes that are 1978 and older have all been painted inside. You still need to give them the form, and you still need to ask the seller, do they know of anything, or do they have any records on it? I would say 98% of the time, seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint and/or paint hazards in the housing. And the second one has no reports or records. So if you remember before, I would encourage people to say, if there were no records over here, you don't need to fill this out. Well, now this is what they've added. Buyer has received the above seller disclosure and all documents, if any. So now you just get them to initial both sides. And this one, please make sure that not only do you get them to initial that form, but you put it in command.
So I'm working up an offer today, or they're signing it today. But the 22J was included in their documents, but it is the old document.
Okay, then you just ask the other broker, this document has been updated. Can you, do you want me to just look at this and, no, you can't because they're sales. I'm going to send you the new updated document, and if you'd have your seller just sign it, that would be great. Yeah. Or
Maybe
you
in my conversation, I'll just include it with my offer, and I'll just say, hey, I realize that
yeah.
this form isn't updated, so I included a new one.
And why they didn't update the 22K, I don't know, because remember, there's last week we talked about charges for internet or
Well, choosing.
yeah, but there is a blank one that says other, and that's why they didn't
Well,
update.
I don't think the internet can do a lien on the property for someone not paying it. That's attached to a person that moves around, whereas water, power, whatever.
That very
is
well could
strictly
be.
to that
Yeah.
location. I don't know,
Yeah,
just brainstorming.
yeah,
I thought the same thing when we talked about it.
yeah. Okay, so that now you need, if any, means if you had any, and they just said there weren't any, so you still have to, now you have to have them initial it on both. And the number one reason that I return in compliance a 22J is you have the buyer, and then you have the brokers. And a lot of time the brokers don't sign it because you don't think about that. Now, down below on both pages, there's a place for the buyers to initial it and the sellers to initial it. In those three areas, that's usually where I find an incomplete 22J. They updated LNA and right here. The contingency period has been changed to 20 days, if not filled in, instead of 10. And if any of you ever work with a the LNA is specifically for large properties, or if you're going from agriculture to residential, or there are specific things. If you need, it's uncertain, a survey specifically, that's where these are used. And if anybody has tried to get a survey done within 10 days, 20 days is really stretching it. And usually you need at least 30 to 45 days, and you really need to make sure that your seller understands that, because it's just not going to happen overnight. And right here, feasibility study, they've changed it there from 10 to 20 days. And then they've added, the parties acknowledge that water rights do not automatically transfer with title to the property, and the parties should consult an attorney to facilitate the transfer of any water rights. So if you're doing land and there are water rights involved, that is like a separate issue. And that can be very disarming when the new buyer gets in there and they're, they go to the whatever and they think they have water rights and they don't. So that's a piece of it that needs to make sure that we do in that transaction. I guess they're just filling in a space here. I have no idea what those lines are for. Okay, crops and land lease review contingency. This is all new stuff. So you have a farmer and they have a crop. So who does the crop belong to? This will go back to your days of getting your license. Do they belong to the landowner or the person they've leased them to? Yes. And what's that called? I am just drawing a blank. There's a special term, like the fruits of the trees. The trees don't belong to them, but the apples do through harvest. Okay. So crops land lease review contingency. Seller shall make available to the buyer, and that's why you want to use this L&A form as soon as practical, but no later than 10 days, if not filled in after mutual, all documents in the seller possession or control relating to any crop or land lease for the property. So if you are listing that, then you need to get your sellers, get all their ducks in a row and have that information ready. Now, we sold the McClellan Ranch by the airport in Chelan, and we had a binder that was about that big. And what people want to know is they want to know all of the fruit counts and all that stuff.
Details.
Yes,
Accounting.
yes, yes. Profit and loss and loans and blah, 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 and inventory on all of the equipment. So if you're ever approached to sell, one of those, just be prepared that your preparation time from the time you start the listing to when it goes listed, you really need, and if they don't get all the information by the time that it's listed, then you'll have a buffer. But if for some reason an offer comes in right away, unfortunately, orchards and farms and stuff like that have a long days on market. Okay, buyer shall determine if in buyer's sole discretion whether buyer wishes and is able to assume all the foregoing leases, contracts, and agreements that extend beyond the closing. They have no power to change that, but they need to determine, can I live with it? If buyer does not give notice of disapproval within 10 days, if not filled in, of receipt of the above documents. So that's really important. From the time you give them out, you have another tracking thing, 10 days, or the date the above documents are due, whichever is earlier, then the lease review contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived, satisfied. If buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, then this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. We had an earnest money, I think, of $250,000 on theirs. Why why they wanted to do that, I don't know, but you know, it was a multi-million-dollar property, but. And just a reminder, your earnest money, if the seller is entitled to and cannot keep more than 5% of the property value. All right, and this last one, buyers shall be solely responsible for obtaining any required consents to assume any leases, contracts, and agreements. So it's up to them to go to those people and just, you know, talk to them. I'm going to honor this. And if they say, well, we want to be able to do the same thing for the next 4 years, well, then that's brand new. Seller shall transfer all of seller's right, title, and interest in and to the leases, contracts, and agreements by assignment, and the buyer shall assume performance of all obligation upon closing. So this just gives it more teeth, gives it more explanation, so your buyer doesn't go in unaware. Okay. They updated the well. And they took out contingency. Well inspection is now like the heading of it. Buyer is advised to conduct all inspections necessary or reasonable to ensure that the well and water quality supply is satisfactory to the buyer. So what they've done is they have taken that one paragraph and they've changed it into 2. So the first one is contingent on the buyer's approval and inspection of the water quality and purity. And then this one is the quantity. Okay. And does anybody, especially you guys, water quality, that place that's over by the sport dogs there, what are they called along the road? There's a
It's off of Gardens Road. Oh, by Cash and Carry.
yes, you can go in there and they will give you kits.
Yeah.
So we always keep about 5 or 6 kits. And then there are certain rules that has to be turned in within a certain time of drawing it. Yeah. Yeah. So if you take it on Friday, you just wasted a kit. Okay. And so they just. You've done a few. The water quantity contingency shall conclusively be deemed waived, and the seller shall not be obligated to make repairs and modifications unless within 15 days or however many you negotiate of mutual acceptance, the buyer gives notice disapproving the inspection and terminating the agreement or proposing repairs to the well related to the water quality. So if you have somebody that goes out and does a water flow, that's fairly expensive, and that is not on the seller. If they have a well log, if you want to make sure that it's still that, your buyer's going to have to pay for that.
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's it. Emblements. Thank you. Sam, you get the gold star. Oh, in Okanagan County, in a few offices in Okanagan County as well. Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you. She had 2 things. Okay, thanks for saying that. Being my wingman here, Darren. Okay, so here's some new forms, I think. Buyer's request for repairs and modification. In almost a year and a half now that I've been reviewing contracts, I've only seen this once. And they wanted the pump they had two pumps. They had one submerged and it was like 600 feet or however far it was really deep. Was bad. It was not functioning fully, and how they could tell that, I don't know. And then there's many times a pump at like a cistern that goes into the house. That way you don't, your well isn't overtaxed and running all the time. So I mean, that helps it. So there are two places there. Oh, and then there's another instance where Russ sold 5 pieces of property and there was a community well and they found out that it was groundwater. There was a hole in the ground. So of course they went in immediately and it was like not even 200 feet that they found a well, but those people had been drinking well water out of the ground for like 20 years. And no wonder they all died and had a third nose.
I have something the first deal I ever had, they tested the water and they found E. coli. And they went in there and the access to like the casing was open. So a bunch of like mice and
Rodents.
rodents
Yeah.
and stuff were drowned in there. And they
Yeah.
were drinking and using that water. So they had to request to have like a infrared. Filter, or whatever, something to purify the water, put in, close it off properly, all that stuff, but they found, the seller found that out and they.
Oh, can you imagine?
It's sick. Well, maybe if you drank it for long enough, like your body builds up an immunity to it or something.
Yeah, but from the very beginning, I would assume we get real.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why we are not well experts
Exactly.
and we're not septic experts. There was one not very long ago where the septic inspector said, not sure where this shit is going. Because it wasn't connected, there was a break to the field. And so then they had to dig it up and fix it. Yeah, that is scary. Okay, on to more pleasant things. Okay, so they added a whole thing in here about modifications, buyer requests, repairs. You know, your seller is going to want to fix this. They may want their own person to go out there and inspect it, but they're going to want to. The seller's response to request for repairs. Seller shall have 3 days once you have given them notification. And to give notice that the seller I'm sorry, I have hiccups, agrees to the repairs and modification, agrees to some of the repairs, or rejects all repairs, offers a different or additional repair or modification, which I can't believe. On a well, I can't imagine what would be different unless you're drilling a new well, I guess. Seller agrees to the terms of the buyer's request for repairs. This contingency, if they agree to it, this contingency is satisfied and the buyer's reply shall not be necessary. If sellers do not agree to all of the buyer's repairs or modification, the buyer shall have an opportunity to reply as follows. Then the seller does not agree with the repairs that the buyer is requesting. Buyer shall have 3 days from either the day the buyer receives the response back from the seller, the day the seller's response period ends, whichever is earlier, to accept the seller's response, at which time this contingency is satisfied, agree with the seller on other remedies, or disapprove of the well inspection and terminate the agreement, in which event the earnest money goes back to the buyer. Okay, so these time periods for negotiating repairs or modification shall not repeat. The buyers must either reach a written agreement or buyers must terminate by the buyer's reply reply deadline set forth in paragraph 4C little II. Okay, so the buyer's inaction during the buyer's reply period shall result in a waiver of this well inspection contingency, in which case seller shall not be obligated to make any repairs or modifications. And it's waived.
Oh,
So it's really important, every single addendum that you take notes. And I like to do an email where all of the addendums and what is it that either the buyer needs to do or the seller needs to do, how many days and when is that waived or satisfied. And then at the end of every week, I like to send that out so that we can show what's done. So there's progress. And then you close
you send that to,
your client. Yeah. And then what I like to do too, if you're representing the buyer and the seller has 3 days, every day bug that broker, say, okay, we have 3 days for their reply. And or vice versa. The buyer has 3 days. And how's that going? You know, you don't have to be aggressive or anything else like that. So this water rights is all brand new. The parties acknowledge that water rights do not automatically transfer, and we read that in the other. And that said, any transfer cost, including obtaining any required consents, so they have negotiated this into the contract now, shall be paid by, who's going to pay it? Because there's an attorney fee and there's filing fees and there's good weather fees. I don't know, there's all kinds of fees when you do that. And it's not something that happens right away. I mean, you really need to, if there are water rights, when you list your property, that needs to be very clear that there are water rights involved here. Otherwise, the seller keeps the water rights, and guess what? Okay, 22T. They've added the sentence, and this is something that it blew my mind. The preliminary commit delivered for review under this contingency need not identify buyer as the insured. So you know when you set up a listing and you order a preliminary title, it will say the seller's name, but it doesn't have the buyer's name. Now, I like, because if I'm representing the buyers, well, actually, I should say Tom, he always represents the buyers. He likes to always, immediately when you, as the buyer broker, you open up escrow and you ask for the title commitment. You want to make sure you give not only a copy of the contract, make sure they have contact information for your buyers. And then that way, when that title commitment comes out, it's up to date. Have any of you ever seen where a property is listed maybe over a year? And so here it is, July 18th. And the date is that the preliminary title was done February of 2022. You know, then you want to really make sure that, because a lot of things can happen. And on that, so that was what was added to the 22T. 23, the manufactured home, remember there's no legal. So a lot of times what they'll do is brokers will attach the Chelan County stating that manufactured home. If they get taxes on it or, you know, whatever, they'll do that just so that they know. But remember, there's no title to the land.
why home on leased land?
Like a
Park?
mobile
Oh,
park.
okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
okay.
Or if you know somebody and, you know, they have a RV hookup and they have a septic thing.
Gotcha.
And then maybe you want to sell that property. and list it. It's big enough to list,
Okay,
you know.
I see.
So these things are just like what we went over last week. Earnest money, they cleaned that all up. And the verification, just changing the numbers. And let me make sure that there's nothing else. They added the increased cost by escrow from 500 to 750 if they have to do stuff. And included the access permission, that your password, your codes, maybe even your front door code. I love those until too many people know it. Okay, so closing in here, it's the same as on the other one that we went over, that the seller shall deliver keys, garage door remotes, and access codes to the buyer on the closing day. So that's just another little thing that we need to make sure. And they included closing costs, and they included the internet charges.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
and I believe, oh, information verification, just like on the other one. 10 days if not filled in. And the time period set forth, specific term 15, that was on the face of the purchase and sale agreement. It's the buyer's advised to investigate whether the property is suitable for the buyer's intended use and to ensure that the water supply is sufficient to meet the buyer's need. So they've just added some verbiage in there to give the buyer beware, pressure, P's and Q's. And then, of course, they added the fair housing, local, state, and federal. We're dealing with this right now in Ferry County and Republic.
yes.
The independent nation of Republic. Anyways, a full offer was given, and then I won't say what their last name was, but they said, no, that's not a good offer. It was a full price offer. Oh, okay.
Good enough.
So anyways, this is vacant land. It's pretty much the same thing. And they made changes in here, just adding the new right here, the 750 over 500. Title insurance,
They took out the,
they took out that.
That's the one thing I noticed.
Mhm.
Never seen-
Oh,
Maybe to make the size of where stuff lined up, they needed 3 letters. or something.
could be, yeah, there's no telling. And FERPTA. Yeah, isn't that interesting? On a manufactured home, they didn't have this one in here. But the seller shall pay any fees incurred by the buyer related to such withholdings and payment. So they just added that to give it a little bit more teeth. And the feasibility subdivision, if the property must be subdivided, remember this one that we're going over is land. So if the property must be subdivided, seller represents that there has been preliminary plat approval for the property. And this agreement is conditioned on the recording of the final plat. So you can't sell a piece of property without a tax parcel number. I mean, you can do it, but it has to be recorded. The plat does. Otherwise, you have to wait until that's done. And then the moment it's recorded, and the reason I know this is I've sold about 12 of these. Recording the final plat containing the property on or before the date specified in specific term 14. Let's just go back and check out what 14 is. Subdivision is not required or must be subdivided before, and then you fill in a date. That has to be before closing. Did I pass it? No. Feasibility, unless satisfied or waived, the buyer shall have the time period set forth in 15 to verify the suitability of the property of the buyer's intended use. So if you don't use a Form 35F, then you have quite a few things, if you read this in this section, of things that they can see if it's going to be feasible for them. And that usually is feasibility is typically used. Now, if it's a more complex, then you'd want your 35F as well. They added an S. Just thought I'd point that out to you. And in here, they just took out,
Areas.
This church is so
yeah,
cost to do so.
yeah. So they took out all of that, and then I think they just,
I think they just changed it.
yeah, they just addressed it someplace else. V, a seller shall cooperate with the buyer in obtaining permits and other approvals buyer may reasonably require for buyer's intended use for the property. We have a person right now that they have an easement to get to their property, and the neighbor has put a lock on the gate. So the seller needs to make sure that they have good relationships with their neighbor and that that's not going to happen. Buyer does not give notice of disapproval on or before the time period set forth on number 15 on the first page. If the buyer does not give notice of disapproval, this feasibility contingency shall be conclusively deemed waived, and the buyer gives timely notice of disapproval, then this agreement shall terminate and the earnest money shall go back to the buyer. So right here, the feasibility contingency form 35F supersedes the contingency of the specific terms. So any of your addendums supersede whatever's in the boilerplate part of your contract. And we took care of this up above. Information verification, that is all. Make sure all of your information is correct. Property condition, that just says the buyer needs to make sure that's suitable for what they want to do it, and the water supply is sufficient, and the fair housing. Condominiums, yeah, pretty much. Access and permission. Access codes. Yeah. Pay the utilities, the internet. FERPTA. Oh, your designated broker doesn't need to be a his or a her. Okay.
They might identify as a cat, never known.
Oh my God, I had the funniest thing with another broker that belongs to another brokerage that he and Russ are just great friends. His son went to school and they had pods of 4, and his son was one of the valedictorians for Chelan High. And he comes in there and he said, yeah, they sent out this questionnaire and we filled it out and said his 4th roommate identified as a furry. And he goes, what the hell is a furry? Going to Boise. Okay, I'm sorry. It was so funny because he is so, yes, funny. Okay, yeah, okay. So, information verification, we've gone over that ad nauseum. The property, they has to be suitable, fair housing. Okay, Form 35. Buyer shall not provide the inspection report or portions of the report to the seller unless the seller request otherwise request in writing. Upon seller's written request, buyer shall provide the seller the inspection report, portions of the report, or the inspector's recommendation for additional inspections as requested. It was so funny. We had a 35R where they were asking for more time. Oh, do we need to wrap it up? Yeah.
Time for a question.
Oh, okay. So we're having an interruption on page 59.
Mark it down.
You guys are all my memories. Yes.
So is there a cap on earnest money, the amount of earnest money you can offer?
There's no cap.
After a certain amount, doesn't it go into a different sort of fund? Well, change grant.
That was.
Fi- But the 5% is if there's a default and it's the fault of the buyer, the seller can only get 5% of that earnest money.
Okay, so you can offer more, but if it defaults, then it really only goes back to 5%.
5%.
Then why would you even ever put more? To win the bid?
Yeah.
Contract, but if the seller can never have that.
They probably don't.
It's just to like show.
It just-
knows, Sid. You gotta know, only 5% that the buyer.
So we were both wrong.
We are both wrong. Thanks for making you know. You can offer more. But
Okay, sorry for the interruption.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Okay. So it is 1:02. And I really apologize. I thought we could go through this faster and I'm sorry it's so dry and boring. We'll stop on page 59 for the inspection
We did
addendum.
like 30 pages last time. 30
Yeah.
pages this time. We'll do 30 pages.
And we'll finish it next time. Yeah, I'll leave it running. Just bring it to Chelan when you come home.
That's perfect, yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you everyone that is out there. And we're stopping on page 59. And this is the red line handout. I'm talking like you're deaf. This is the red line handout that is on the Northwest MLS under rules and regulations. Okay,
Like 59, 89, 30 pages, 3 days, 30 pages. Thank you, Marsha.
you're welcome.
Yeah.